Abortion is a right that we earned, that women fought for, and that certainly the Roe versus Wade decision gave to women. But it's increasingly, it's a right only on paper.
Hello and welcome to the Contrary. I'm Bonnie Erbe. This week we continue our Women Thought Leader series with Cecile Richards, the pro-choice activist and former president of Planned Parenthood. In her memoir, Make Trouble, Richards talks about standing up, speaking out, and finding the courage to lead. Welcome, Ms. Richards. Very happy to see you here.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's good to be here.
So Planned Parenthood's behind you.
It is, although it will always be such a big part of my life. I think like a lot of women in this country, I was a Planned Parenthood patient when I was in college and a supporter, and then it was really the honor of a lifetime to get to serve as president for 12 years. It's an organization that I think once you've been part of it, it never leaves you.
Tell me how you started out, what you thought you were going to quote unquote be when you grew up.
Well, I grew up in Texas, where I think we probably didn't have big aspirations for women at the time, but I was really...
But wait a second, your mother was governor.
Well, but when I was growing up, she was a housewife, as we called it in the day, and it wasn't until much later, really after we were grown, that she got involved in politics, and that was a big... it was really when the women's movement started, and she realized she could do more than have the perfect dinner party, as she would say, and she ran for office, but not because anyone in the Democratic Party urged her to do that. I think she just looked around and realized that she could probably do a better job than the guys, and they were men who were in office, and that's really. And once she started, of course, then she kept running and eventually became the first woman elected in her own right governor of Texas. But that wasn't how it was in the beginning when I was growing up.
So you went to college though? What did you study?
So again, I grew up in Texas. I'd barely ever been out of Texas, but I had read about when I was in high school about this college back east where some kids had taken over the university building because they were concerned about student aid and definitely concerned about African American students on campus and their opportunities. And I thought it sounded great, so I applied and got in, and my mom and I got in a station wagon and drove to Providence, Rhode Island, sight unseen. And so I had the opportunity to leave Texas and go to school at Brown, and it was a great experience as well. But again, in those days, the thought of going away, leaving Texas to go to school was pretty unusual.
Interesting. And what was your major?
Well, I majored in history, as I like to say, and I minored in activism. So I was pretty much involved in every political issue that came through. At the time, actually, it's interesting. I try to tell this to young people about why sometimes it takes a long time to make change, but at the time, the big issue on campus was getting the universities to divest from South Africa and the apartheid government. And of course, the universities said, "This is crazy. You college kids, you don't know what you're doing." Actually, eventually, Brown was one of the first universities that divested, and then, of course, many others did. And as we know now, that was actually part of the whole international campaign that did change the government in South Africa and supported the movement towards freedom and democracy. But it took a long time. And it was funny, a few years ago, I went back for graduation, and Brown was giving Nelson Mandela an honorary degree. And I thought, it's a long march of history sometimes, but I think things change because young people or people who are just concerned about what's happening do something about it, take charge and make change.
So, and how did you end up at Planned Parenthood? You said you made use of the services.
Well, I've done a lot of things, and of course I had 3 kids. We went and helped Mom get elected governor. Like a lot of women, I just took whatever the next job was that needed doing. And then when they called me, the search firm called and said they were looking for a new president of Planned Parenthood. I had the same reaction that I think a lot of women have when they're offered a new opportunity, which was, I can't do that. I don't have that kind of experience. And I write in my book that I almost didn't go to the interview because I thought, this is this is crazy. And in fact, I remember so distinctly, I was on my way to the interview, and I rushed into a coffee shop because I thought, I can't do this. And I did what any grown woman would do. I called my mother and I said, I don't know what to do. And Mom said, get over it, Cecile. You have got to try this. This is such an important organization. And she said, you'll never forgive yourself if you don't try. You'll always wonder. And so Ann Richards gave me great advice all the time, and a lot of other people too. And I'm really grateful. It was because of her that I went to the interview, I got the job, and it changed my life. It's an amazing organization that provides health care to millions of people every year, many of whom otherwise probably wouldn't get health care.
But as running most nonprofits, wasn't a lot of your job fundraising?
A lot of it's fundraising, like anything that's a cause, but it was also making the decisions of how to invest and what to invest in. And I'm really proud that we decided to invest in young people, making sure that they could get access to sex education, to health care, kind of get them on the path of, take responsibility for themselves. And I think, Planned Parenthood played a role in the fact that we now have the lowest teenage pregnancy rate in the country, in history. And I'm really proud of that. I feel like giving young people the opportunity to finish school, pursue a career if they want, whatever they want to do is important. And the other thing we did is I raised money along with all my team to invest in the South. Access to reproductive health care and health care in general is so uneven in America. I felt it was really important to make sure that if you walked into a health center in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, it would be the same as if you walked into a health center in San Francisco. And I'm really proud of the fact that we opened centers in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, Florida, places where I think, unfortunately, folks just go underserved. So, but you're right, a lot of it's raising money. And I think for us, it was also about gaining new supporters, which we did.
Obviously, the political climate has changed so completely around abortion rights with the Roe versus Wade decision in the early 70s. And at that point, without any limitations, women could women were in charge of their bodies through certainly the first trimester and much of the second. And now we've seen all these states passing laws, more recently like the fetal heartbeat, and making poor women who they know can't afford to wait 72 hours after an appointment to actually have your abortion, blah, blah, blah. How have you experienced that? And do you think you've done anything to turn it back around? Will the pendulum swing the other way?
You're exactly right, Bonnie, that the restrictions that are being passed in state after state, including my home state of Texas, are really regulations that have nothing to do with women's health. They are all about trying to restrict access to safe and legal abortion. And as you also pointed out, it falls hardest on women with low incomes, women who live in rural areas. And of course, we had a big Supreme Court case that came out of Texas, which essentially would have meant the closure of dozens and dozens of health centers. Fortunately, we won that. Of course, I and many, many other people are concerned about now with the change in the Supreme Court, what it will mean, because there are so many cases that are coming up through the federal system that will go to the Supreme Court eventually. I think it's really wrong. I feel like abortion is a right that we earned, that women fought for, and that certainly the Roe versus Wade decision gave to women. But it's increasingly, it's a right only on paper, depending on what your zip code is and depending on your income level. And I think that's wrong. I know that, ironically, perhaps, support for Roe versus Wade and access to safe and legal abortion is as strong as it's ever been. It's actually the highest it's ever been. And I think that's partly because of the threat that's posed by this administration. But I can't help but adding that some people think this whole fight is about abortion rights, and it's actually not. It's about all reproductive health care. And one of the biggest achievements under President Obama was getting birth control for all women under their insurance plans at no cost. This was revolutionary. And yet this administration is trying to reverse that, trying to make your boss in charge of whether you get birth control or not. and also trying to dismantle the sex education programs in this country. So unfortunately, abortion is the topic that gets talked about, but underneath all that, there's a lot of work being done to simply erode basic access to education and health care.
Well, you say it's about more, clearly, I mean, the feeling, I think, in the pro-choice community was always that if they were able to get, they being the religious right who is really pushing this war on women's rights, that if they could get rid of abortion, the next thing would be birth control. And that's happening.
Already.
But isn't it really a war over religion and people of a certain type of a certain religion trying to force their view of the Bible down other women's throats who may not necessarily be religious or agree with what they think their religion is telling them to do on this topic?
Well, I would certainly agree that this is not a religious view that's held by people of all faiths. Absolutely. And in fact, one of the important pieces of work we do at Planned Parenthood is work with clergy and religious leaders all across the country and every community, because for so many people, actually working for reproductive rights and health is a matter of faith. I do believe there are a group of people in this country who, for a whole host of reasons, want to turn back the clock on women's rights. Unfortunately, what's happened, Bonnie, I think this is where it's gotten so challenging, is that there's a very small group in the Republican Party that have taken over, essentially, the leadership of the party, and they have been able to move the party in a rightward direction, even though Republican women need access to reproductive health care, including access to safe and legal abortion. They support these rights as well. But I feel like now what we're seeing, and I know this is the frustration in the country, is that we have this Congress that is that is so polarized that there isn't any room for conversation. And I certainly have found that, and I did find that my years at Planned Parenthood. I do think it's a small minority that is holding captive, in this case, an entire political party. And in some areas, really, the United States Congress and state legislatures. It's sort of why
But you don't see it as a religious war?
I don't think it's just religion. I think it's political, and I think some people actually just don't think that women should have rights. I think there are people who pine for the days when, like when my mother was bringing us up, that women basically didn't have other options. Once women could control when and whether they had kids, they could decide to finish school, they could decide to become a lawyer, they could decide to travel, or they could decide to have the number of children they wanted. That really did change everything for women. It's why we're now half the college students in this country. I think some people are motivated by the fact that it worked better for them when women took care of the kids, stayed at home, supported their husband. And for some families, that's great. But I think the real change is that women are now the majority of a lot of things in this country. And for some people, that's upsetting. And unfortunately, some of those people are in elective office.
How has technology impacted the abortion debate?
Well, it's interesting. You know, we at Planned Parenthood, we provide health care to millions of people. We're a big advocate and work for things like the birth control benefit. And we also always work to be on the cutting edge of all reproductive technology. And so I do think that one of the things that's changed is now, of course, the abortion pill, which is something, it's a medical form of abortion rather than surgical, that's early in pregnancy, very, very safe, started in Europe, and it was really Planned Parenthood health centers that introduced it across the country. I think it's made abortion accessible for women in a new way, and I think that will continue to grow. I'm also, though, proud of the fact that we use technology to help on the birth control side. In fact, one of the things I was most excited about as I left Planned Parenthood is we just did the FDA trials about a self-injectable birth control shot, and you can teach a woman how to do it themselves, and they can go to Planned Parenthood, get a year's worth of birth control, and take it home. And we found the efficacy rate is so much higher. And that, to me, is the irony of all these political battles, is we're getting so much better at preventing unintended pregnancy and the need for abortion, yet that's the terrain on which people in Washington want to fight. Why don't we just all get together and make birth control more accessible, more available, and that would take care of a lot of issues for women in America. But instead, I think they'd rather have a political fight.
Well, and control.
And control, that's right.
Control over women.
I mean, it's I was just speaking to a bunch of women lawyers. Women are now in a lot of classes at least equal or the majority of law students in this country. The latest class of NASA astronauts to graduate was half women. It's just exciting that women, and I think this is what, we may go through this pitched battle here politically, but women aren't going backwards. Women have now felt what it's like to have the opportunity to do whatever you want. And I think one thing I hope Bonnie is changing is I think men have now seen what it means to have their daughters have the same opportunities as their sons. And I've always believed that we're not going to change things for women until everyone gets in on it. And I really believe men are going to be an important progressive force in this as well.
We talked about technology, and I wanted to give you my view of how technology has impacted, which everybody has a sonogram as soon as their pregnancy is, 6 weeks along. And I think that the image of the fetus turned a lot of women against abortion. But then, as you say, the fact that medical abortions or non-medical abortions came along, that kind of, hit the ball back in the other direction towards pro-choice politically. And I mean, we have seen support for abortion rights wax and wane. I'm just saying I see two two technological influences over time. First, the sonogram, and then the abortion pill.
Well, I guess I have a slightly different point of view in that if you look at polling, I mean, support for abortion rights, and just, again, I think it's important to distinguish the support that people feel in this country is that it really should be the pregnant person's decision what they do about their pregnancy, and that's really what we're talking about. And I think that's incredibly important. I know for myself, I remember being pregnant with twins, and suddenly there's just more information than you have that I even had in my first pregnancy, and that was really interesting and important. And I think what I hear from women and families is that we've made these medical advances so you can learn more about this growing fetus. And that also makes how important it is then that people who are pregnant can make decisions about that pregnancy. I mean, and unfortunately what I hear from some of the laws that have been passed in some states is essentially, well, we're going to give you all this information and you can make no decision about whether to carry the pregnancy to term. And that just seems, I don't believe that's where the American people are. I think abortion is a very personal topic, and I think that's right. I think it's important that someone who's pregnant make that decision, not a judge or a lawmaker in Washington or someone who has no idea about your circumstances or the life that you live.
The abortion pill, at least according to the latest Guttmacher Institute data I've seen, there's still way more surgical abortions than there are abortions by pill. The last time I saw, and I could be out of date by a couple of years, it was something like 1.1 or 2 million surgical abortions per year versus several 100,000.
Yeah, I don't want to speak about something I don't have the exact numbers on. Medication abortion is definitely more recent, and so in fact there are a lot of OBGYNs or providers who actually may not even use medication abortion. They're used to providing surgical abortion. That's one of the reasons I think Planned Parenthood is important, is we're able to introduce new options for patients, whether it's new birth control options or anything else. And so I think the important thing and what we believe at Planned Parenthood is women, trust women. Give them all their medical options, give them all their information they need, and they will make the best decision for themselves. And that's, I think trusting women is the most important thing that we can do.
What's your advice for your successor, Dr. Wen?
I mean, I told her when I met with her before she took the job, I said, it's the most extraordinary opportunity of your life. It is an organization that literally you will see if you get to get out in the field, and I know she will. Go to health centers. You can see people whose lives are changed by having access to affordable health care, reproductive health care, sometimes even just someone to talk to. I've met so many people, not only at our health centers, but who will stop me on the street and say, Planned Parenthood changed my life. And I think she's a great great successor. I'm honored that she has chosen to do this for the next phase of her career, and she's going to be tremendous.
What about the fact that she's the first doctor, first MD who's ever run Planned Parenthood?
I don't know if she is the first MD, but she's certainly there hasn't been one for a very, very long time. Look, I think that's important. I think there's, Planned Parenthood does at least two really important things. We provide excellent medical care, and in many ways, I think, set the standard for reproductive health care in this country through our medical committee, and we're a movement. And when those two things come together, we're really a force to be reckoned with in a good way.
Now, she is, as I understand it, concentrating, making sure that there are clinics in states, I think more Midwestern, Northeastern, Western states that are whose regulations are more abortion friendly, and then, or at least I read this, and then raising money to fly women from places like Louisiana, which last time I checked had one abortion clinic left out of 5 that it had many years ago. Do you think that's a good approach?
And I don't know, she just started, so I actually don't know that that's what she's planning on doing. I think that is, I know from living in Texas, just being able to get on an airplane doesn't actually solve a woman's problem. And it's as we talked, I think you mentioned earlier, for a lot of the women who rely on healthcare providers like Planned Parenthood, they don't have the ability to take off a week of work. They have other responsibilities. Often they have other children. And so I think that I'm sure that Dr. Wen and Planned Parenthood will continue to fight to make sure that all reproductive health care services are available in every single state. That's been something we've done our entire history. We're now 101 years old, and I think it's really important that people be able to go to a healthcare provider that they trust, that's in their local community, if at all possible.
The title of your book is Make Trouble. Why is that?
I guess because from an early age, I was sort of branded as a troublemaker, and it stuck. I opened my book with an incident when I was in 6th grade where my teacher in Dallas said, are you just trying to make trouble? And I really wasn't thinking about myself as making trouble. I was just asking a question about why we had to recite the Lord's Prayer in school every day. And I guess it kind of stuck. And I do talk about in my book and to other folks, making trouble is a luxury. I've been very, very fortunate in my life to always be able to work have a career that changes things or makes social change for good, I hope. And so I realize it's not for everyone, but I think this is a time in this country that everyone needs to make a little bit more trouble. And I certainly talk to young women and say, look, if there's something that you think isn't right, there's a good chance that somebody else doesn't think it's right either. And it's important to, you'll be surprised if you actually stand up and say something or talk to your friends. You'll find that there's more, I think you have more in common than you would expect. And that's what we're seeing across the country. I've been traveling around the United States these last 4 months, listening to women. Women are on fire in this country. They are making change. They're running for office. They are starting new organizations. They're going to town hall meetings. They're calling their members of Congress. A lot of the women I've met who said, I've never done anything in my life before, but now it's time to stand up and actually see if I can make a difference.
What's next for you? Politics?
I've always been involved in politics one way or the other.
No, I mean running for office.
I don't know. Never say never, but that's not my plan. I'm so excited after these midterms to see so many young women, young, diverse women running for Congress, running for the State House, and getting elected. I'm really interested in what we can do to now organize women across the country to be the most important, powerful political force we can. Because I think women are the agents of change. They always have been. And this is a particular moment in our country where I think women coming together across generations, across racial lines, across geographic lines, across party lines, can be a force for good. And I'd love to be part of that.
And but you haven't figured out yet how yet.
Well, I've already been working with some women, yep, and we actually we've been in 15 states talking to women and beginning to organize. And again, what I'm finding from women is they're saying we just need support for learning how to do this better, learning how to work together, and learning from each other. And so, stay tuned, but that's my plan.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. This has been so informative. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.